Probably a lot of you have read some of Stephen Covey's books. He's got a lot of good information in all of his books, and he wrote one of his books is titled 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in habit 5, he makes the comment that communication is the most important skill in life. Now, I wouldn't say I wouldn't necessarily agree with him. I think godly thinking, godly behavior is in that sense the most important skill in life. And but he does when he mentions communication, he mentions speaking and listening, and that's communication. Listening, and sometimes is even more important than the speaking. So he makes a great deal of very important points in all of his books, actually. And I think it's important to think about communication because it is a huge key, extremely important in the area of relationships. And as we know, Christianity is about relationships. You know, Christ talked about the 2 top commandments, loving God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and the same for our fellow man, fellow people, fellow human beings. If you like SVS's, mine is importance of asking for elaboration. Importance of asking for elaboration, and a title would be, what do you mean? What do you mean? That question can be applied not only to relationships, but it can be applied to studying the Bible, or for that matter, for anything. What does that mean? Sometimes I wonder, God, why didn't you explain that a little more clearly? Because it's hard to understand some of the things in the Bible. So that particular question is important no matter what subject you're talking about. But I'm going to focus in on what do you mean in the context of relationships. You know, most of us, maybe all of us, have heard the idea, the saying, you can prove pretty much anything from the Bible. You can prove pretty much anything from the Bible. And although that's not really true, there's a lot of truth to it. If you twist scriptures, what have you, you can kind of, at least in your own mind, you can prove an awful lot that is not true, even in the Bible. I want to elaborate on one point on asking the question in the context of relationships. You know, there are an awful lot of misunderstandings in our communication. And one of the common reasons is not applying the biblical principle in James 1:19. I'll read that. The book of James, chapter 1, and in verse 19, it says, "This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear." So there you have the hearing. Everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. So a big reason why we have misunderstandings is because we're not quick to hear, and we're quick to speak. A lot of times we're not listening to really understand. We're listening with the purpose of replying. In other words, we're thinking, well, what can I say about what this person is saying? And we're not really zoning in and zeroing in on what the person is saying. We're not really listening. And that's a key to staying away from misunderstandings. We tend to listen with the idea of responding, not really understanding what the point might be. Maybe the person's not making his point real clear. So my one point is asking for elaboration. Now, this is a tricky, often, what's the right word? It's often not taken well. When you ask somebody, well, what do you mean by that? Or would you mind elaborating on that? And there's a real proclivity with most human beings, maybe all human beings, at least from time to time, of, well, what do you mean? What do I mean? You know, what I said was clear. Why can't you understand what I just said? So you have to be real careful about asking questions like this. You know, what do you mean? Can you elaborate? Can you explain what you said? Because a lot of times a person will feel attacked. They'll feel attacked with that kind of a question. And one of the points regarding that is the idea that, you know, if you're asking that question, you're kind of implying that the person's wrong. And that's, a lot of times, that's not even the intent at all. So I'm not going to turn to it. I'll just refer to Proverbs 15:1. It says a soft answer and also a soft question turns away wrath. So when we ask a question, especially in that context, it's important to think about how to ask the question so you don't anger the person. So the whole idea is to try to get some communication, some discussion, some real, you know, discussion of what's being talked about. You know, it's good to ask. Questions are good. It helps us to learn. You know, I sometimes wonder, you know, when Eve was talking with Satan in the garden, and Satan apparently, you know, I mean, who knows how he phrased his comments to Eve. Satan is a master at communication. He knows how to use words. He knows how to twist words so easily. And when he said, well, apparently Eve told Satan, well, God said if I eat of the fruit, that we'll die. And right away, or you know, at one point in the conversation, Satan said, well, you will not die. Well, that would have been a good time for Eve to say, well, what do you mean? Was God lying? You know? But she didn't. And Satan, again, is probably is such a master at communicating that, you know, it would be hard to discuss something with him without hearing an awful lot of twisting of words, twisting of ideas. Words can be used in such a way by anyone. We've got to be careful about how we use our words, and so it's important to ask when there's maybe not a real clear understanding of something. To ask, could you elaborate? Would you mind elaborating? I'm not quite understanding what your point is. And, you know, in anything we talk about, we don't complete every detail of every idea or issue. We never do. There's always something that is left unsaid. But it's important to try to communicate that way. You know, the disciples asked Christ an awful lot of times, what do you mean? Why do you speak to them in parables, you know? Why do you say, we know where you're going? There were all sorts of questions that the disciples had of Christ. And even when they asked the questions, it was like, a lot of times Christ didn't even answer their questions all that clearly either. He had his purpose. Christ had his purpose. And, you know, sometimes when people are discussing, sometimes somebody will ask a question or make a comment, I should say, and maybe the best thing to do is just not say anything, you know. Maybe it's so silly or so whatever that it's best to just, use the principle, answer not a fool, in that context. Sometimes it's best just to say nothing and realize and understand that if you even ask a question, it's just going to antagonize the person, it's going to irritate, and it's going to make the conversation even more difficult. So, real basic point, when you're discussing, and it's so important to discuss, it's important to, use the principle of iron sharpening iron, that implies, doesn't it, a little bit of friction, when you're discussing something that might be a little bit not easily understood, or maybe you can tell there's a difference or a disagreement there. But discussion is always good. Asking questions in the right way, in the right time, to the right people sometimes. Sometimes you shouldn't ask anything of some people. It would just blow up. It wouldn't be a good idea to, it's not always a good idea to use this particular principle for everyone. You have to consider who you're talking to. But a good discussion, it encourages thought, further thought. It encourages, that it shows the person you're interested in what they're saying. It just really leads to a lot of growth. And by discussing things that are maybe you're not seeing eye to eye, human beings don't always agree. Any of us that are married realize that, we just don't always agree on everything, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all have our perspective, our experiences, and our way of thinking, our personalities, and there's nothing wrong with disagreeing, as long as we really strive to use those principles and do it in a godly way, realizing, think about something that might antagonize and just back off and try to think of another way to say it, or maybe not say it at all. But it's important to realize that we're all going to disagree on certain things, whether it's political issues, whether it's some political, whether it's even some doctrine. There might be disagreements regarding doctrine. Christianity, in understanding what leads to salvation, and with us, what leads to being a first fruit, is really pretty simple. And, there are disagreements. There's no reason why we have to fear disagreements, but it has to be done in a way that shows respect, shows equality in the relationship. People that think they're above you, in a discussion, then it's probably best just not to, just to back off. It's important. It's a way of growth. Questions are very important. Encouraging questions are very important. Encouraging comments to further the understanding. We all have our limits in understanding and knowledge and all that, and so it's important to really strive in a way, in a godly way, to get along, to realize that we don't know, we're not even close to knowing everything, and we have ways to go in that area, and so we can learn from everybody and anybody. We can learn from everybody and anybody. And so it's important to realize that, and we might be right, we might be wrong, they might be right, they might be wrong. That's not the important thing. The relationship is what's important.